asks the boy not to do it at all, but he does not listen to them. Ludus says that everything will be fine and tries to remember the magic formula. He manages to activate his powers, and he stretches out his hand and uses the supreme healing. The boy calls out to everyone and says that everything worked, when suddenly part of his outstretched arm falls out of his sleeve. Ludus and the rest of the students start screaming, not understanding what is happening, which makes the hero immediately alert. The hero knows exactly what will happen if someone uses healing on a healthy
We don't realize that a lot of the time we set ourselves for failure. We have our phones that open 1,000 possibilities for us to do 1,000 different things at every moment of every day. But again, God has set good works for us. He has prepared things to do right now. So we need to block off all other things that impede us to actually focus on the thing that God has called us to do. And this is difficult because we've spent years, if we had a couple of years with phones, we've spent years training ourselves that at the slightest discomfort, the slightest uncomfortableness with the task we have before us, we just run away. And we get distracted and entertained through our phones or through some streaming service. And we don't realize that that actually is training our minds to crave that distraction. So a great way to stop doing that is just to cut off those distractions for a little while. At the beginning, we could start with 5 minutes. Let's do some uninterrupted reading for 5 minutes. And it's going to be hard, but attention is sort of like a muscle. We need to practice to actually sustain it more and more. You wouldn't go to the gym and just lift up the heaviest of weights in your first day there. You would start small and then be constant and constantly improving. So it's the same way with attention. Just block off regularly every day blocks of time where you just shut off the distractions and you focus on one single task. And then you go from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, then to 15, then half an hour, maybe an hour. That would make your brain power so much stronger if you constantly do it. But remember, every time you choose distraction, you're training yourself to be more and more distracted.
body. Incoming mana will lose its purpose, and excess healing power will cause necrosis. He realizes that things are bad and decides to use higher healing. Sino has already started shouting to Ludus to quickly call the teacher, when suddenly the hand joins him again. The boy is shocked and cannot believe that
how do I know if my life is being fruitful? How do I know if I'm living the Christian life? What does that look like? And it can be really tempting to think, maybe that means I teach thousands of people. Maybe I share the gospel with hundreds of people and tell them about Jesus. And there are lots of things that can be considered good works, and that's for sure part of the fruit of our salvation. Ephesians tells us that we've been saved by faith, but we're actually going to perform these good works that were prepared in advance for us. So seeing change in our life is part of a fruitful life. But I think one thing that's often neglected is it's not just what we do, it's the way we do it. So we're told in Galatians that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. It lists out this whole list of what it looks like to walk by the Spirit, and none of them are kind of things that you check off on your checkoff list. It's like, oh, I shared the gospel with 50 people. It's not like that. It's actually the way I've done it. So I could be doing a lot of really good things, and I could be really mean. I could be really angry. I could be really unkind. And I could be looking like, oh, but I'm so fruitful in the kingdom. I'm doing all of this. But the Spirit is our guide, that when He's doing the fruit bearing, it's going to look a particular way in how we do it. So we want to evaluate not just, am I doing good things that shine Christ to the world, but how am
The Acts chronicles the rise of the early church in the years following Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension, offering us insights into how Jesus' first followers took the gospel to the very ends of the earth, inviting both Jews and Gentiles to believe and find salvation in Christ. If you've ever read Acts before, you know there's pretty amazing, but at times confusing stories that sometimes leave us with questions. What exactly happened at Pentecost, and why was that so important? What was so bad about what Ananias and Sapphira did that led God to put them both to death? What was that peculiar vision of animals on a sheet coming down from heaven? And who was that Macedonian man who called to Paul in a dream and asked him to come to help him? In today's video, I'm sitting down with Nancy Guthrie to ask these questions and more all about the Acts. Nancy Guthrie teaches conferences and events throughout the US and around the world. She's also the host of the Conversations in the Bible podcast, and the author of numerous books, including a new book called Saved, Experiencing the Promise of the Acts. Let's get started. Well, thanks for joining me again on our podcast. So today we're going to spend some time walking through some of maybe the most confusing or odd stories or scenes from the Acts. It's incredible, by the way, and it's so foundational for who we are as a church of God, and we see that the story of Jesus extended beyond his actual earthly life and ministry. Before we get into some of those really interesting stories, I want to help us orient a little around the book as a whole. So what are some of the major things we say we should know about Acts before we jump in?
Awesome. And by the way, this is like all this stuff. So I really didn't stay there for a while.
We just started usually Luke and Acts as one book.
Oh, yeah, like Luke's two-part work, and the first part would be the Gospels, and then the second part would be the book of Acts. You know, it's such a unique book. I mean, the Gospels have a lot of historical narrative. The book of Acts is primarily historical narrative, and it's telling us about such a unique time in redemptive history. Jesus comes, he's seen us in the very first chapter. We read about him from heaven pouring out the Holy Spirit on his people in chapter 2, and then he is at work through his apostles in so many interesting ways. And that actually brings up one of the challenges of reading Acts, because most of us have a tendency of the Bible. We read things out of the Bible, and we want to jump immediately to applying it to ourselves.
Yeah, practical application.
Which is not really because we want to apply it to us. I think it's important when we learn about Acts to recognize this was a very unique time in redemptive history, as these 12 witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus, the apostles, were at work preaching the word, and the church is being established. It was also a unique time in redemptive history, and as most of these first converts are Jewish, they're taking hold of Christ as being the fulfillment of everything in the Old Testament. That he's fulfilled the law in his righteous life, but he's also fulfilled all the ceremonial law and so much other Old Testament things. There's so much part of their life. So things like circumcision, or the festivals that happen here, or their diet. So many things that are a big part of Jewish way of life that we see come to the fore in the book of Acts as they are working out physically. So these things are
What's happened and how does that change everything for us?
exactly. And so when we actually see Paul affirm continue to do some of these things from the Old Testament time, but then also when we be very clear that circumcision is not required to become Christ, to be one of his people. So Acts is unique in that way. We can't take everything we read in the book of Acts, things that they very unique, they cast lots to every place before Jesus. We can't just go, okay, this is how I'm going to do this. Roll out. Yes, it's how he did it. But Acts is explaining kind of these things, and we cannot necessarily say, okay, then that's the way we should do it. And as we see the church take shape, the way they do things, we can't necessarily say, okay, then that's the way we should do it. It's our work of the way to do it. And so we can't even make it up.
Yeah, Acts is unique. It's a pivot point. It's like history. There's so much transition happening as we go from Old Covenant to New Covenant.
And it's so centered on this foundational verse. There's one verse in the book of Acts. It's Acts 1:8. Jesus says, and first we have to understand these 12 apostles. He says the Holy Spirit's going to come upon them. He says, and in power, he says, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the end of the earth. And when we have that verse, we essentially have an outline of what's going to follow that
Yeah,
one.
I think that's the structure, the progression of stories of the Acts actually reflects something about the gospel itself.
It totally does. And when we read that, you'll be my witnesses. This is a good example of reading something, and maybe wants to that us. But he's speaking uniquely to the apostles. By witnesses, I think the way I would use the word witness.
Yeah,
We're all witnesses, right? Yes, we give our testimony, our Christian life. I think when we read that in something, it's more about what is important.
These are actual witnesses.
What is important to do? What is important to this life? And that's the case with the apostles. Part of what it was like to be an apostle. They have been with Jesus, and particularly they have seen the risen Jesus. And that's at the heart of what they're witness to. We're not just making it up. We actually saw the resurrected Jesus, and that is the testimony that they're taking out to the world. And they've got a particular progression that's taking that message to place. Begin in Jerusalem, and then it's going to expand. We see that in chapters 8 to 11, and then they take the gospel into Samaria, and then they take the gospel to Antioch. They're beginning to share the gospel, not just the Jews, not just the Samaritans, not just the God-fearing Gentiles, but at that point, they're taking the gospel to pagan Gentiles. And when we read Acts and it says to the end of the year, I think another thing that many times we think that's still a call for us to take the gospel to the end of the year. But actually, when we get to the end of the book of Acts, that's been accomplished. Paul takes the gospel to Rome, which would have been considered the end of the earth, a far outreaching area, and from Rome it's going to go to many places. And so that's one verse gives us a way to think about the structure of the book of Acts, and it helps us see that the apostles that are at the heart of the story of Acts, seeing this saying to Jesus. He doesn't say, here's what I need you to do, guys. Like he's asking them to do this. When he's instructing them to do this, his statement is, you will be my witnesses. And that is exactly what happens. And when we say we can immediately apply to ourselves, maybe we don't go too quickly to ourselves, we can get to ourselves, because here's the important part for us. The apostles were witnesses to the risen Lord Jesus. And what we have in our Bibles, in the Gospels, and in the epistles of the New Testament, is their written record as eyewitnesses. They heard Jesus teaching, they witnessed his death and resurrection. And so one thing for us, if we aren't witnesses, then we take the gospel to the end of the year, we are proclaimers. We are proclaimers of the apostolic witness. They have recorded for us what we most need to know. They have provided us with a sound record.
Divine inspired.
And the divine inspired record, yes, through them, of what we need most to know about the person of Christ and so forth. And so how do we proclaimers? And we do want to take that to every person, every nation.
Yeah, this one book of Acts, the name that we've given this book is the Acts of the Apostles. Others have said that maybe a better name for this book would be Acts of the Holy Spirit, but you argue that maybe you better call it the Acts of the enthroned Lord Jesus. What do you speak about that? Why do you argue that maybe it's the best way to think about this?
And I think that a number of people, Dr. Trainer and Dr. Gaffin and Brian Thompson, all of them have suggested that maybe Acts of the Apostles might not be the best way to look at it. It might actually be more about what Jesus is doing. And the reason for that is, probably chapter 5 in our words. And when Acts begins, he says, in another book, talks about what Jesus began to do and teach. And so it's essentially like he's going to tell us not now the apostles did and taught, but rather what Jesus continued to do through his apostles, the Holy Spirit, to preach word in those early years of the ministry of the apostles.
Yeah. So the first scene I want to do this afternoon is actually coming of the Holy Spirit in Pentecost. This is important actually right beginning of the book. I want you to just set the stage for us. What's going on in the early church at this time, and then help us understand what we're seeing when we read about these flames of fire from people's heads and the speaking tongues that comes down in the story.
Well, I think one thing that really helps us to get at what's really happening at Pentecost is to even consider when it happens.
Yeah, what is Pentecost?
Yeah, so Pentecost was this festival that or feast that the Israelites had celebrated ever since the instruction was given from them when Moses came down the mountain. And so at this feast they were celebrating the name for the feast of harvest. So they're celebrating the first fruits of a great harvest to come. Okay, right now, the presence of what Pentecost is about. Really, because what happened on Pentecost is like the fulfillment of what they always been celebrating about a great harvest to come. Because what we witness on this Pentecost day is the Holy Spirit is poured out, which when Peter explains what's happening, it goes back to Joel and Let me tell you what happened here. And he goes to the book of Joel, he quotes the prophecy, and he says, this is exactly what's happening, which Joel just said in the last days, he's going to pour out his spirit on all flesh. And for what purpose Joel says that's going to happen? So that your sons and daughters will prophesy. In other words, so that all God's people, not just those individuals called prophets, but all God's people would be able to articulate the gospel of Jesus Christ, so that there would be a great harvest of souls becoming joined to Christ. And that's exactly what happens on Pentecost. Peter stands up and he gives this sermon, he uses several Old Testament passages, and explains that this is what's happening. He explains that Jesus, who you crucified, it actually happened. That's part of the plan.
There's a couple lines in there about God's sovereign plan coming to fruition through the insane simple actions of humans.
The beautiful mystery of God's sovereignty is articulated both in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4. And honestly, over my lifetime and the struggles I've had to try to understand God's sovereignty and the difficulties in my life, those two passages have been so significant. Because he's saying cruel men, evil men, put it on the cross, but in the same breath, but it happens on both sides. And Christ said, we want to get it, or something like that. And not people understand that these evil men are responsible for it. And it all happens on both sides. I think that matters, especially for those who may be listening to our suffering. We try to make sense of suffering in our lives. This is one of the things we're supposed to do. Okay, God, did you cause this? Did you allow this to wrangle with the sovereignty of God? And there are so many things in this world happen that are so hard and so dark. We cannot imagine that anything good could come out of them. And this is where we need to see the cross. And we need to see that God actually intended the cross. Because on the cross, what we see is the greatest evil in the world. There's nothing more evil than to put the pure and holy Son of God nailed into the most evil deed that ever happened. And yet, this passage in Acts, they show us that actually this was fully God. And it was actually the best thing that happened. It accomplished the greatest good in the world, which was the salvation of sinners. And the reason that matters for people who are suffering is we can look at the cross and we can say, okay, if God could not only use but intend something as hard and dark as the suffering of his own Son on the cross to accomplish his sovereign good purpose in the world, then maybe I can begin to believe that it's in my life that I can't see anything good that ever comes. Maybe I can begin to believe that actually God's sovereign plan and purpose could accomplish something good.
Yeah, the truth of Good Friday can be the truth for all of us all already. So let's go to the scene then in this incredible book, so in Acts 5, where we see the story of Ananias and Sapphira, these two. I don't know how you describe this couple. Are they scoundrels? Are they misunderstood? Are they just unwise and foolish? Like, how do you characterize them?
Well, the first thing I have to say is, to me, the fact that this story of these two, imagine all the things that's been happening. Because, these are two, 40,000 souls.
Yeah, a lot of people.
And yet Luke is going to take time to tell us here about these two, this particular couple. And
not in the best way.
Not in the best way. I think myself, this authenticates the writer. It's to make a story, or write a book to try to convince people that Jesus was the Christ, and these are the people, and you must become a part of these people. You know this right up front, the story of these people. So I so appreciate that. I also think Luke's doing act. The Pharisees had intensified them. They had taken something to increase, and they built laws for everyone. I think you and I could hardly imagine what exactly those laws. In regard to what we could eat, we just did this, and what we do when we touch, just all those things, the heavy weight of clean and unclean. And I think we also have a really hard time grasping how deeply ingrained those things were in these first Jewish beliefs. They just never thought to have a big and nice. I mean, they just never wrapped out. No, they just never get back to really see that in the way that Peter responds. So yeah, so he has this, but she, it's all the animals, all unclean. And he told Katie, unclean. And he has told that 3 times. So it's significant.
In my mind, he felt
pride because he says, by no means, Lord. He said, I would never eat what is unclean. And so he said, are you kidding? I would never do that. And so it's like 3 times. And we actually, we have heard a lot of times, 3 times, but also it's 3 times because it is so deeply ingrained in him that these things are offensive to God. He has to be told 3 times to really hear it. It's the most interesting thing about the story. So 3 times, you know, I think he's been thinking in his mind, that's
how we get some of it. It's the next part